Hello, this is Jerry. Welcome back to Nehemiah Part 9, Chapter 12. Now, we'll not be talking about Chapter 11 because it's mostly business matters and genealogy. They cast lots to see who could live in Jerusalem and who would live in the nearby cities. 1 out of 10 could reside in Jerusalem, now that it was safe with walls and gates, and the list of families are given there. So we pick up in chapter 12, which begins with the genealogy, but then with the dedication of the wall, starting in verse 27. So I hope you're ready to celebrate. Through this lesson, you'll notice that we're designating today as Levite Sunday. Now, they would have preferred a Saturday, I know. Let me remind us that Levi was the third son of 12 born to Jacob. 12 boys, 1 daughter. These 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel, with Israel the name God gave to Jacob. And the Levites were later given the privilege to be in charge of the tabernacle and temple because of their zeal for the Lord. And by the time of the book of Deuteronomy, a generation later, they had taken a large teaching role as well. So the tribe of Levi was not given property in the promised land like the other tribes, but rather towns, so they could be spread out among all the nation as teachers and godly leaders. So it wasn't just temple work they did. Within the tribe of Levi, there were the priests. All priests are Levites, but not all Levites were priests, because the priests were from one particular family line within Levi, the descendants of Aaron. Notice Aaron in the center of this chart. Exodus says, "You shall anoint Aaron and his sons and consecrate them that they may serve me as priests." As well, the non-priest Levites diversified and developed specialties like gatekeepers, officials, judges, teachers, building administrators, and, of interest to us today, musicians, both vocal and instrumental. Okay, back to Nehemiah. "And at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness, with thanksgivings, and with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres." When Nehemiah and Ezra planned this grand dedication, they sent for all the Levites throughout Judah. Thanks to the Ezra genealogies, we know that, curiously, there were many more Levitical priests than other Levites, 4,289 priests to 341 other Levites who came back from one of the returns in exile. Now, you wouldn't guess that the priests were a subsection of the Levites from the numbers. But they all got a special invitation to the dedication. Here's their time to shine. This mission is right down their alley. Now let's consider these instruments mentioned: cymbals, harps, and lyres. Plus, down in verses 35 and 36, there are trumpets and what are called the instruments of David. So, a bunch of other instruments. 2 Chronicles 7:6 tells us the priests stood at their post, the Levites also, with the instruments for music to the Lord that King David had made for giving thanks to the Lord. So David commissioned the making of instruments, and those instruments were used by the Levites here in this dedication. We don't know what instruments they were, but we have a pretty good guess. Now let's start with ancient percussion. David may well have used drums, considered one of the oldest musical instruments, and almost certainly the Levites included drums. Now, by the way, the oldest musical instrument, probably used by our parents Adam and Eve, was what? The voice, the singing voice. Anyway, drums gave a pleasing sound that helps keep the rhythm and beat, what percussion instruments do best. And there were cymbals, which came in different sizes, often very small, even like 4 inches in diameter here. They were made of brass or bronze and very high-pitched, like these ancient Israelite bronze cymbals found crammed into the cracks of an ancient wall. The ancient Israelites also used a toph, or timbrels, or what would be today a tambourine, many small cymbals attached to a hand drum, and they have been popular from the ancient world through the medieval to now. In Exodus 15, the celebration of the victory over Egypt's army, Miriam took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her with timbrels and dancing, and she sang the song of Miriam. In addition to percussion, there were stringed instruments like the lyres and harps. The harp was larger, with more strings and more musical range. The lyre was more portable, usually with a U-shaped structure. There was an ancient guitar also that went by different names: a tambour, a kithara, nefer, later an oud and a lute. Now we have images of these even before 3000 BC. Now, in this ancient Egyptian scene, there is a bennet, or harp, on the left, a nefer, or this very thin guitar. The third adult woman is playing an argul, or a double flute, and the fourth, an interesting combination of a lyre with a strum box like a guitar. Later, the oud and lute became more popular. Now for the horns. The Jews used the ram's horn, especially at festivals, and the metal straight trumpet. It had a limited amount of pitches, like a bugle. King Tutankhamun, or King Tut, was buried in 1323 BC with these two trumpets, one silver and one brass or bronze. They are the oldest trumpets that can still work in the world. And we know they work because a British Army trumpeter played them live on the BBC radio in 1939. There is also an image on the Arch of Titus in Rome that shows Jewish trumpets being taken from the temple by Roman soldiers in the destruction of the Second Temple, AD 70. And of course, there were woodwinds, various pitched pipes and flutes. And you can notice right away that of all the instruments, they are the most holy. Now, from these, we get the flute and recorder. And there were pipes with a vibrating reed or a double reed that eventually gave us instruments like the clarinet and oboe. And the sons of the singers gathered together from the districts surrounding Jerusalem, for the singers had built for themselves villages around Jerusalem. Okay, it's interesting that some of the Levite singers were hanging together in the same towns and villages. Would love to stroll through and hear their music. And the priests and the Levites purified themselves, and they purified the people and the gates and the wall. Other Levites sanctified themselves so that they could go on and sanctify the people and then the walls and the gates. This involved rites of washing or anointing or sprinkling with the blood of sacrifices, and of course prayers of consecration. Then I brought the leaders of Judah up onto the wall and appointed two great choirs that gave thanks. One went to the south on the wall to the dung gate, and certain of the priests' sons with trumpets and with musical instruments of David, the man of God, and Ezra the scribe went before them. At the fountain gate they went up straight before them by the stairs in the city of David, at the ascent of the wall above the house of David, to the water gate on the east. So Ezra led this first group counterclockwise with half the Levite singers. Now most think they began at the valley gate and then went south counterclockwise and then north up to at least the water gate. The other choir of those who gave thanks went to the north, and I followed them with half of the people on the wall above the tower of the ovens to the broad wall, and above the gate of Ephraim, and by the gate of Yashanah, and by the fish gate, and the tower of Hananel, and the tower of the 100, to the sheep gate, and they came to a halt at the gate of the guard. This second celebration group went north clockwise by the tower of the ovens, then over the broad wall, around the fish and sheep gates, to the inspection or guard gate. So both choirs of those who gave thanks stood in the house of God, and I and half the officials with me, and the priests with trumpets, and the singers sang with Jezreiah as their leader. Okay, finally, both groups form one group of worshipers in the temple courtyard, where Jezreiah directed both choirs together and with those instruments. Oh, I want to be in that crowd and hear that, don't you? And you all who sing and play, imagine being with them. A glorious, once-in-a-lifetime experience. And they offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and children also rejoiced, and the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. Well, we can see why this is Levite Day, can't we? This was their day to lead Israel in this magnificent dedication. Now, here's a question. Are there still Levites today, beyond the popular Jewish men's singing group called the Levites? Absolutely. Some Jews, more than a few, have meticulously maintained their family descent from the tribe of Levi, or Levi, they would say. Many have changed their last names to Levi or Cohen. Cohen is Hebrew for priest. Here's an interesting quote. Today, Levites and Kohanim, that's the priests, comprise about 8% of the worldwide Jewish population. A genetic study in 1997 determined that large numbers of people who believe they are Kohanim, that's priests, whether they are Ashkenazi or Sephardic, that is, Ashkenazi being Jews from Eastern Europe that spread to Western Europe, or Sephardic, the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, that they share a group of markers on the Y chromosome. Wow, that's so fascinating. Under the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, a Jewish organization praying for the rebuilding and renewal of the temple worship someday, there is now also a Levitical choir with musicians formed in 2023. As they say, the first Levitical choir in 2,000 years. Every person in the choir is verified as a Levite. Quote, the Levitical choir is to prepare in every way possible in order to be ready to perform the moment that the temple offerings as prescribed by the Torah are renewed. Now, today, we've seen the ancient Levites leading Jews in worship in the temple courtyard, not long after the Feast of Booths. Now, incredibly, about 2,465 years later, this happened again. In 2024, in Jerusalem during the Feast of Booths, these modern Levite singers, with other Jewish musicians, led in a large public worship celebration during the Feast of Booths. It's incredible. Wow, modern Levites leading a worship service in Jerusalem around the Feast of Booths. This just had to be included with our lesson today on the ancient Levites nearly 2,500 years earlier. So this has been Levite Day. God deemed it so important for Israel to worship well that he devoted a whole tribe to be their worship leaders. Next week, Lord willing, we will finish the book of Nehemiah with chapter 13. Nehemiah has to go back to the Persian king, and then he returns some years later to a nation in need of him again, as we will see. Thanks very much.